Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan, and we are, as usual, exploring the science around the pandemic. Now, there are many people who would say the pandemic is over. This is what they've been told. But then we're hearing about a mystery pneumonia occurring in China. Is it new? Is it related to the pandemic? What about where we are at the moment? Now, one of the critical things that I always say is that from a scientific point of view, I look at outcomes. I look at what is expected. And that's very important clinically, meaning that if a patient had a chest infection and I gave them antibiotics and they weren't better, I would go back to the science to try and understand what was going on. At the moment, as we see variants flying all over the world, hospitalizations are going up. We're seeing people getting sick. Excess mortality remains high. Nobody could tell me that at the beginning of 2021, this is what they expected. This isn't right. Something is not quite right at the moment. And we need objective scientific analysis to try and see if we can make sense of it. And so today, I have the pleasure of having with me two experts. We have Jennifer Smith, who we've had before, and Janci Lindsay, who have not had before, but has tremendous expertise with molecular biology and toxicology. So this is an interesting discussion. And even before the start, we were just chatting about some of this stuff. This is going to be fascinating. I'll let them just talk. But let's start off and get them on the stage. So I'll ask both of you to unmute your mics for me. And I'll ask Jennifer if you want to go first and just give the audience an introduction as to who you are and what it is you are about.
Sure, Phil. Thanks for having me back. It's been a while. As you know, I have a doctoral degree in microbiology and molecular cell sciences with subject matter expertise in virology, specifically with respiratory viruses. So I spent a majority of my career working with influenza. I've worked with mumps, RSV. I've managed government contracts for vaccine development and testing of candidate vaccines for hemorrhagic fever viruses. More recently, I worked as an epidemiologist at the Hawaii Department of Health, where I was on the front lines of the pandemic response in Hawaii. And I was subsequently discharged from my position there for blowing the whistle on the corruption in Hawaii. And it's all outlined in my book entitled Pandemic in Paradise.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. And what about yourself, Lindsay? Give the audience an introduction of yourself.
Well, I'm a toxicologist and molecular biologist. I have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, over 30 years of research. I started off in reproductive biology. I helped develop a zona pellucida immunocontraceptive vaccine. It was meant to be a temporary vaccine, but unfortunately, it ended up causing ovarian sterilization, and it's now used as a sterilizing vaccine in animals, the ZP3 vaccine. I moved on to pulmonary toxicology research. I worked in adenosine deaminase deficient mouse models with different receptor knockouts to study the immunopathology of adenosine deaminase deficiency and excess adenosine in models, especially on the immune system. So I have a heavy immunology background as well. And I've worked as a toxicologist for the past 15 years or so. And I've really enjoyed it. I have my own company and done a lot of fun work.
Excellent, excellent. Now, one of the interesting things about both of you ladies is that both of you are scientists who are willing to speak out and risk the wrath of censorship. You know, starting with you, Jennifer, what is it that made you take that position that most people would not do?
That's a good question. I guess as a scientist, I'm trained to be skeptical. I'm trained to question things. And early on in 2020, when the PCR test was first rolled out, red flags went off. And, PCR, I've done thousands and thousands of times. I've designed, developed, performed PCR. I could probably do it with my eyes closed. So when I first heard about the PCR test and how it was being done, that really started me, something went off and it was like something just doesn't seem right here. And as time progressed and the pandemic progressed, there were a lot of alarm bells going off because the response did not seem proportionate to the threat. As somebody who's worked with these viruses, who's done vaccine development and testing, there were a lot of things that were being done that just were not making sense to me. And as a scientist, as I said, we're trained to question. We're trained to critically think about these things and ask questions and discuss. And being in Hawaii was very difficult because I was in kind of a scientific vacuum. There really weren't virologists or other infectious disease researchers there who I could talk to and ask these questions to. So I turned to social media, obviously LinkedIn, where the professionals are. And I tried to start to discuss with my colleagues, like, hey, am I seeing this right? Is this correct? Like, what's going on here? And started asking questions and try to get this discussion going, because that's what we do as scientists. So just doing
Excellent.
what I was
Yes.
trained to do, I guess.
And what about you, Janci? What made you take a position? Because most scientists don't need to. Why you?
Well, they were lying. They were calling something that was clearly a gene therapy. Any molecular biologist would know this, a vaccine, and in fact changed the definition of vaccine to make it accommodate this gene therapy. They were talking about herd immunity and saying that you would have to have this vaccine every few months, when everybody knows that if it's a vaccine, of course you wouldn't have to have it every few months. That doesn't make any sense. So there were a lot of red flags, and there was a lot of lying going on, and the lying was so blatant that it shocked me as a scientist. I couldn't understand why other scientists weren't standing up, were just buying this and going along with it, that they placed such deference to the CDC and FDA, who were spouting things like this. I mean, clearly calling something that was a gene therapy, oh, it's not a gene therapy, it's not a gene therapy. There's so much evidence to back up that it always was. I couldn't believe they were lying about it. I guess that's it. I was outraged that they were lying about it. I'm an expert witness for a living. I defend when it's appropriate, when there are unjust claims made, and I try to help when someone's been harmed. Lying is not tolerable.
So you're raising some important points here, both of you. You are two in probably a million, I mean, there's so many people out there who have an understanding of the science here. And this is really what caused the public to trust it. Because you would sound like an outlier. They would just say, listen, nobody else is saying anything. The fact that you guys are saying something, it's a representation that maybe there's something wrong with you, not the science. Why did everyone else sit quietly? That's
Well,
something the public is trying to understand.
Well, as I told people, you have to consider the source. The first thing I always do whenever, somebody presents me with something is I ask, who is this person? What is their background? What is their expertise? Who is paying them? You have to follow the money. And in this case, that is the key. Follow the money, because that's what it's all about. And that's why a lot of these people, and I kept telling them, who's telling you this? Is a politician? A journalist? What do they know about viruses? What do they know about vaccines? Who's paying them? We know now, I mean, here in the US, we're one of two countries where pharmaceutical companies are allowed to advertise all over the radio, all over the TV. Every other ad you hear on the radio and you see on TV is sponsored by Pfizer, sponsored by Pfizer. Everything is now sponsored by Pfizer. Follow the money. It's very simple.
So it raises an important question because, as I said at the beginning, no matter what your position is, I think everyone at this point has got to responsibly reflect on, are we now where we expected to be? So even if you were very strongly that the right thing was being done, you have to ask, is this the outcome that you expected? Now, the reason this is important is because there is always a temptation to say I was right and I could see, but we are actually in quite a serious situation and we do need to understand exactly what is going on. How do we get the scientific community to pull in the same direction when you know what it's like? Everybody has an ego. Nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to say,
Mhm.
how do we get the scientific community to start pulling in the same direction? Any thoughts?
Well, we have to tell the truth. We're right back where we were in 2020 with this new supposed deadly infection in China that's coming over here now. They're still going on about coronavirus, but if you look at the number of cases, of course, it's much less than the flu ever was, but it's still a big deal. We talked about this earlier. The perception of what's going on is being created around these new infections to, frankly, in my opinion, drive a new vaccine, to drive lockdowns, to drive school closures, to do all the things that were done with the first pandemic, in my opinion. And it's coming again, and people have to not comply. They must not comply.
So I'm trying to genuinely understand now. Listen, if how does the public accept? I mean, it's one thing for it to be coming from trusted sources, but if I'm giving you an antibiotic for
Mhm.
chest infection and I reach the seventh time and I'm giving you the same antibiotic, at what point does the patient say, this is not right? And this is what I'm trying to understand. I just don't understand. Why would people trust that that would work? Again, we're dealing with something that's very complex here, and just using a standard shot
Mhm.
in the dark, it cannot seem to explain what is happening. We haven't even explained why what we did in the first place didn't work the way we should. This is what I mean is I just don't understand how people don't ask those questions. What's going on?
It is
Jennifer?
very, I mean, it is very troubling. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't understand. I have this conversation with my friend who's an infectious disease behaviorist all the time, and even he's confused. Like, how did these experts fall for this? How did these clinicians and scientists just go along and continue to go along and swear up and down that everything was great and everything we did was just right? And they're patting themselves on their back. And look, they just gave Dr. Fauci an award and a big monetary money, for his role, and he's a hero. And all of these people have now, again, follow the money. All these people have now cashed out. Look at where they've all landed. Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci and even former CDC Director Robert Redfield. Look at where they've all landed. They all have great consulting gigs with pharma companies.
Yeah, and there's a false consensus around this. The reality is that we only have about 2% uptake of the latest gene therapies. And that's because people know what's going on. Now, the media would have you believe that all scientists are on board with this and all recognize that this is the only way to go. But the truth is that that's not the truth. There's a few paid propagandists that are out there telling you that everybody agrees with them and this is the most wonderful technology in the world. And that's it. The reality is that most doctors and scientists do know what's going on, but now they're embarrassed and they don't want to admit they were wrong. They also don't want to risk a paycheck. And frankly, they don't want to risk their liability immunity, because if they speak out, then they void that protection, which protected them under the 21 CFR 360 BBB for these medical products, which are military countermeasures. So they are protected as long as they do not break rank. If they come out and say they were wrong or these are dangerous, they no longer have immunity. And that's what we're
Wow.
facing right now.
So this is where we need to know, and before we go into some of the other things, I'm just curious to hear. I have my thoughts. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are as to what exactly is happening now. Whichever way we take it, cases are rising, deaths are going up, hospitalization is going up. So this is not normal, and this is not being driven by a flu. This is something about COVID-19. Any thoughts as to what may be going on at this point?
Probably antibody dependent enhancement, if I had to guess, because that's what happened with all the other efforts, over the years in animals and in people when they tried to develop coronavirus vaccines. Sang et al. 2012 does a nice job in going through the immunopathology that they found in mice using various gene therapy vaccines, using vaccinia vector, adenovirus, and spike protein, mRNA, DNA. They all caused immunopathology. And I think that may be what's going on here, along with some antibody-dependent enhancement and also tolerance. So tolerance to the proper effects and overreaction to the virus that normally comes around.
I mean, there's some great studies that have come out that basically have proven and vindicated what a lot of us have been saying, immunologists, vaccinologists, and Garrett. You've had Garrett Vandenbosch on your podcast several times, and he's now, I think all this evidence is coming out to prove what he was saying all along. And the one study came out that showed that, we've talked about this before, after the second, but most likely after the third injection, what we're seeing is a skewing of the immune response towards IgG4, which is tolerance. So what we're doing is programming immune tolerance. What does that mean? That means that when your body sees the offending protein, it will no longer react. So what that's called is pathogenic priming. So we're allowing the body to ignore now the spike protein because they've been given so many injections. So pre-pandemic, there really was no data. There was no data on multiple sequential doses of mRNA injections. There just wasn't. Now we know from mRNA therapeutics, where that was used for cancer, we know what happens there, and it's immune tolerance. The other paper that just recently came back out was a Japanese study where they showed what happens after the fifth dose. I don't understand why we're up to 5. I've heard there are places where they're up to 7 now, doses of these things. And who would think that it was even appropriate to give 7 doses of a so-called vaccine over 2 years? That seems unconscionable to me. But after the 5th dose, what they're showing is not only do individuals not develop a cellular immune response, which is the memory immune response, but after the 5th injection, their percentage of people who actually acquire a cellular immune response decreases. So what you're doing is eliminating the cellular immune response, which is the memory response, which is what responds when you do see the offending pathogen again. And this has to do with T cell exhaustion. So immune tolerance and exhaustion go hand in hand. So we're skewing their immune response, and then we're just obliterating it. So people no longer respond. And I think this is why we're seeing an increase in infections with other. Garrett talked about this. He talked about this many times. This is why we're seeing now an increase in infections with other viral pathogens like RSV, and
Mycoplasma
flu. Yeah. So, I mean, the studies are coming out now to prove what we knew all along.
So this is again the point, is that yes, I think that quietly scientists may acknowledge, okay, in their mind, as you said, and Janci, they won't say it aloud. Okay, we've got a problem here. We can't speak about it, and so I'm now actually pulling you guys into the situation for them. So I'm pulling you now, Janci, into that situation. You've taken a position. Fine, we know what it's like. We all do make mistakes at some point. We don't necessarily want to talk about it, but we are in a situation here where we need people to talk, to come up with solutions, mitigation strategies, because if we just let this go, If we just let this go and just say, okay, then let what happens happen, this is a disaster. So, Janci, putting you in that position, what do you do as a scientist? Do you revoke your immunity?
If I was in that position, then I would begin to speak out and try to rally my colleagues around doing the right thing, and working together to try to get some kind of amnesty for not doing the right thing when I had the chance. If I was in that position, in the position that I am in now, I'm doing everything that I can to educate people across the country because our CDC and FDA are hopelessly broken. I don't know if you saw the recent interview with the new woman child head of the CDC, but basically saying that they weren't concerned about the Ebola or HIV samples in the California lab. And they didn't see any evidence of anything to be concerned about. This is who's leading our federal response for pathogens and bioemerging pathogens. Someone who clearly is gaslighting the public and has no interest in protecting the health. We've got to come up with alternative agencies. The World Council for Health is one. We've got to notify people about what's going on, and we've got to start litigation. Absolutely, we must start litigation.
So these are some serious points, and here is an important question, because we're facing two pieces of a crisis at the moment. One is that we are not supposed to have a situation where we have used 13 billion doses across the world and still have virus circulating. And this is not endemic, as some people would say. This is still at almost a pandemic level of circulation. So this represents a challenge study. And this is when we spoke about that response to people facing the virus who have already been vaccinated in the animal studies. But that's one side of the puzzle. The other side of the puzzle is that we could be looking at long-term immune or
Damage.
effects. So just imagine the pandemic had passed. Okay. Would that mean, Janci, I'll start with Janci on this one, because this is one of where your expertise is. Would that mean we were out of the woods?
No, not if you have a compromised immune system. You'll be susceptible to any other agent that comes along. But I believe that this has already been anticipated, and they will have a new gene therapy ready for you to boost your immune system to react properly now, just like you see the cancer therapies and cardiac therapies that are suddenly becoming available at just the right time for all of the cardiac damage that's been done. This is as Jennifer said, a financially driven model of create the problem, provide the solution. I absolutely believe that 100%. I'm not trying to, put something out there that's not true. They talked about it pretty widely before any of this happened. Daszak was at the World Economic Forum and other meetings talking about all the money that they could make off of these technologies. To ignore that and to think that they would not capitalize on this type of thing is being very naive. We've got to get control of these people and get control of our healthcare system again, because we are going to have a lot of sick people, a lot of people susceptible to any type of infection. And we're going to face lockdowns again and deprivation of our constitutionally granted rights.
Any thoughts on this, Jennifer?
I mean, it's very troubling, Philip, because as a scientist who was vocal from the beginning, sometimes I get so upset because I thought, if people had listened, just imagine the damage that I could have prevented if I could have had more of a voice in the beginning. If Geert had been listened to by the world leaders and by the WHO leadership, just imagine what we could have prevented, the pain and suffering we could have prevented. Now, I sent this graphic before about the phases of the pandemic. And in that, I put that out there in 2020, early 2020. And the fourth phase was the damage to the response to the pandemic. So, and I know we've talked about this before. I've said it, a couple of years ago now. I can't believe it's already been a few years, but I said this on your podcast before, is that we need to pivot to start looking at ways to treat those people who are damaged by the injections. And here we are. And I believe this is now the new pandemic, is all the damage and all the damage. There's the fourth wave, all the trauma, all the illness, all the mental, spiritual,
So
financial
just break
stuff.
that down for us a minute. So what is the first wave you're saying here in purple is the immediate mortality and morbidity with COVID-19.
Right. So that would have been
Goes up and it comes
2020.
down. That's 2020, 21, and so on. The
Right.
second wave you have is the impact of resource restrictions on non-urgent COVID. Okay. And that goes up and down. The third wave is this one here, which is the impact on interrupted chronic conditions. That goes on over time. And this fourth wave, what is this here? This is mental illness, economic burn,
This is the
economic
effects on all
impact.
the other health, all the other aspects of health. We've talked about mental, emotional, spiritual, financial. Those are all very important aspects of health. And we're still seeing that. And we're seeing it more so now than we were in the first year or two of the pandemic. So as I've said before, all the human intervention did was make things worse and prolong it. And here we are. And instead of taking a step back and saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe we need to reconsider what we're doing, they just keep doubling down and tripling down. And we're at what, 5, 6, 7,
8.
So instead of stopping and taking a pause, we're now just keep doing the same thing we're doing. That's the definition of insanity. Just keep doing what you're doing and expect a different result.
And Jennifer, your thoughts?
I think the biggest message I can say is you have to be a consumer of your own healthcare. You have to be your own advocate. We know that the healthcare system, at least here in the US, has been largely corrupt for a very, very long time. We now know that the public health system is corrupt as well. So be a consumer of your own healthcare. Do your own research. Those are the scariest words for these people now, is they did their own research. Do your own research. Talk to people. Get a second opinion. Get a third opinion. Also, do what you can to boost your own health. Do what you can. It sounds funny, but they are starting to take nutritional supplements off the shelves. They've already taken one whole company out because they're selling nutritional supplements. So you need to do what you can. The food you eat, what you put into your body, how you move, what you put into your mind, is all so very important to build your own health. So build your own health, be your own advocate, be a consumer for your own medical care.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, both of you. I think this has been quite inspiring. As I said before, we need people to speak out. And you don't necessarily have to agree with everything that they say, but certainly listening to their objective scientific perspectives. And as Jennifer just said, I think this is a time where everybody will have to start doing the hard work of doing research and reflecting carefully on what they're being told. If there is any lesson that has come out of the pandemic, is that you cannot just hand it on to people to make it for you. We all have that responsibility. And that's the other piece that has come out of the pandemic, is that everyone is responsible. And sadly, no one at the moment has been made accountable. So thank you both very much, and wonderful. I know that I'll probably have to speak to you again, Janci, and as usual, Jennifer, I will probably talk to you again. Have a great evening. I'll ask you to wait until after the outro, and have a great evening, everyone.
Well, thank you, Philip. Thank you for being a voice in the darkness, and keep doing what you're doing.
Great.
Yes, I echo those sentiments, and thank you very much for being open to listening to some controversial statements, it's time for us to have tough discussions and to be honest.
Excellent. Great evening.
All right. Thank you.